Hello, my name is Diane, and today I want to talk about Emily Wilde's Map of the Otherlands by Heather Fawcett. This is the sequel to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. If you haven't read that first book, this is a fantasy series that is basically set in our world in the 1900s, with the exception that fairies are real, and we follow our main character, Emily Wilde, who is a professor at Cambridge, and she works in the dryadology department studying fairies. She is working on, in the first book, her Encyclopedia of Fairies, which is the first ever, and she's collecting as much information as she can, finishing up her research to get information on each of the different types of fae, because there are a wide variety of them. They live in different places, they behave differently, they interact with humans differently. So we follow along with her as she's completing that research, and the story is told through her journal entries. She keeps a fairly detailed journal of what's happening as she's doing this research. So we're following very closely with what's happening, although we're not really getting play-by-plays for certain things. And I like the way that this is narrated through her journal, because we see a great deal of what's going on and her thoughts on what's happening, but there is a little bit of reflection, and we are able to kind of gloss over certain details that aren't necessarily important. I never feel like anything's missing from these stories, because we're still getting Emily's account on what happened and her thoughts on what's going on. Alongside Emily, we have her dog Shadow and her friend and professional colleague Wendell Bamblebee, where Emily is a very logical, scholarly person. She's not very good in social situations. She tries, but she's kind of given up. She's just not very personable. Wendell, on the other hand, is a complete contrast to that. He's very charismatic. People tend to very much like him and feel at ease around him. He can really talk his way into or out of basically anything. And I really like the dynamic between the two of them. They have some good banter. They have a very teasing relationship, because they understand how very different they are, but they still work very well together and are looking out for one another throughout everything that happens. They get into a bit of trouble. The fae in this book are, as usual, very tricky. They like to make deals, but they like to fool humans when they make those deals, so that they maybe get a little more than the humans bargained for. And I think that type of contrast in their relationship with one another, their personalities, also kind of comes through in just the overall tone of this story. It is Emily's journals that we're following along with, so it is more of a logical researcher standpoint, but it's not dry. There is a bit of lighthearted moments and humor sprinkled throughout in the way that people talk to each other, or maybe Emily goes headfirst into a situation and then realizes there was a much simpler solution afterwards. And I always think that's kind of a humorous moment when you find that out, where something was set up in advance for her that she didn't realize or didn't know about, and end up taking a much more difficult route, unfortunately. And I was a little hesitant to pick up that first book, because I'm not really drawn to fae stories personally, but I'm really glad that I did, because I'm having a lot of fun with this series. If you haven't read that first book, I definitely recommend checking this series out. I think it's very well written. The story's a lot of fun. I really like these characters and how they interact with one another, and how crazy this world can get trying to make sense of all this fairy nonsense. I'm definitely having a lot of fun with it, and I'm really glad I gave it a shot. But I do want to talk more about the second book, which might spoil some things that happen in the first book. So if you haven't read that yet and you don't want to get spoiled, this might be a good time to stop watching. So if you have read the first book, or you just don't care about spoilers, let's get into Map of the Otherlands. At the beginning of this book, we know that Wendell is an exiled fairy king. We also know that he has proposed to Emily, who at this point has still not given him an answer, but he is holding out hope. When we catch up with them, they're at Cambridge, and Wendell's stepmother has begun sending assassins after him. For some reason at this point, she has decided that he is a threat to her reign and needs to remove him. So assassins start coming to Cambridge. People are definitely taking notice. They are not being very subtle about what's happening, and it's very difficult to explain. So they set off to find the door to Wendell's kingdom to hopefully put a stop to this one way or another. And Emily is also taking advantage of this because she has begun looking for all the fairy doors. She wants to put together a map of the Otherlands, a map of the fairy realm, and where all the doors that connect it to the human world are. So they set off under the guise of looking for doors to make that map, but really they're looking for a way to Wendell's kingdom. And alongside them, we have Emily's niece, who is 19 and has convinced her father to let her study dryadology at the university. And she winds up tagging along as an assistant, despite it being very dangerous. The department head has also invited himself along because he has unintentionally gotten wrapped up in all of this. He's not very happy with Emily or Wendell, but ends up forcing them to let him come with them. And of course, Shadow comes along too. So our group makes their way to the Austrian Alps, and there they settle into a cottage and start interviewing the locals and following another researcher's work where she left off. She disappeared at some point in her research, so they think that that may lead them to the door to Wendell's kingdom. Things really don't waste any time picking up in this story right from the get-go. We're at Cambridge and the assassins start attacking very early into the story, which I very much liked. We're already pretty much settled into this world and these characters at this point. We meet our new companions and things waste no time from there. As we get to the Austrian Alps, things get progressively weirder. There's more fae that we're introduced to. There are more characters. We do get some appearances from characters from the first book, but there are certainly a lot of new faces as well. There's also a lot more danger in this. We are still making deals with fae. There are fae that are after them, obviously. There are assassins everywhere. Emily in this book, I feel like, has gotten even more stubborn and a bit more arrogant because she's been around fae and magic for a while at this point. She's gotten very comfortable with it, and it's pointed out to her that that is a very dangerous thing. So she's kind of coming to grips with that. It's very self-aware within the story that at certain points maybe she's put a little too much faith in what's going on around her. She's also working on being more compassionate. She does have some character growth as we go through the story. She worked on it a bit in the first book, but she really delves into bonding with people on a more personal level. There is more romance, although it's very mild. There are a lot more battles, but they're not super detailed or gruesome. There are a number of battles and dangerous situations in this, but I don't feel like it gets too dark or detailed at any point, although there are a number of attacks and assassins everywhere. And in this book, there's also the addition of a magic cat. I'm not gonna get too much into that because it comes a little bit later in the story, but I think that is a fun addition to the group. Overall, I really feel like everything that was done very well in the first book we get even more of in this book, and not in a way that felt like more of the same, just in a way that felt like it really elevated everything that happened and was good in the first book was great in this book. The dynamic, the banter is still there. We get a larger group of characters at the center of things happening. There's a lot more magic, there's a lot more fae and trickery. Emily begins to doubt her own mind as she's trying to logically make sense of all of the fae things that don't make any sense to a human mind because we just can't comprehend how outrageous it is. We learn a lot more about the fae and their relations to humans, and also spend some more time in the fairy realm. I really enjoyed this book. I thought this story was a lot of fun. It was very engaging. I really like these characters and seeing what kind of trouble they get into while they're doing this research and dealing with Wendell's past finally catching up to him. Definitely recommend this sequel, especially if you read and enjoyed the first book. I think you'll really love this one, and I'm hoping that we get to see more of Emily and Wendell in the future. I had a lot of fun with this book. Let me know if you've read it, what you thought of it, or if you're planning to read it. That's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.